Bob, and take it away.
Thank you very much. I also want to thank all of you for having us here today for Lunch and Learn. Very happy to be here on the Tufts campus, beautiful campus, my first visit to it, and we're looking forward to meeting with you and having a nice discussion about what we're up to. Again, my name is Bob DeSalvio. I'm Senior Vice President of Development for Wynn Resorts Development. And if we're lucky enough to receive the license here in the Boston area, I will be the president of the property for Wynn Resorts in Everett. So I'm really excited to be part of this team. Of course, I'm joined by Chris Gordon, who's been our project manager from the start on the project, and John Taco, who has helped us with community relations. It's a wonderful project. I feel like it's probably important for me to tell you a little bit about my background and how I wound up here, a little bit about the company, Wynn Resorts, and then I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who's going to really get more specific about the project and also about our environmental remediation plans, because I know that's really one of the lead topics. We're going to try to get through this fairly rapidly so that we can leave a good bit of time for Q&A, because I'm sure you guys probably have thought about some things that you may want to ask us, and we always like that part of the interaction if we're at any of the universities or colleges. So by way of background, my family, Brooklyn, New York family, immigrant family, and I was the first one born in northern New Jersey. I loved the hotel business when I was growing up as a kid, and I wound up going to the University of Denver. Their Daniels College has a very good school of hotel, restaurant, and tourism management, and I started working for Hilton Hotels while I was at college and got transferred back to New York City in 1978 when I graduated. And then I took a chance and visited a friend in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and wound up getting an interview with Caesars, and then spent the next 18 years working in Atlantic City as they were going through the kind of revitalization of Atlantic City and the growth of the gaming business in that particular town. And spent some time with Caesars, Valley, and the Sands. And after the 18-year stint there, I got a very interesting call from the Mashantucket Pequot Indian tribe, who owns Foxwoods Resort Casino, to head up their marketing operations. I went there as Executive Vice President of Marketing and spent 10 years in Foxwoods. We were doing some large-scale development at the time, building a new high-end tower. We worked with Rees Jones on development of 2 golf courses, part of what's called the Lake of Isles complex. And I wound up living in North Kingstown, Rhode Island. So I am fairly familiar with the New England area. About 41, 42% of our business at Foxwoods was from Eastern Massachusetts. So it gave me a good connection to this particular area. And myself, my family really liked the area. I then was contacted by Las Vegas Sands Corp out of Las Vegas, Nevada, about a very interesting project they were working on in Pennsylvania. They had purchased the center core, 124 acres of the former Bethlehem steel plant. And it was part of the largest brownfield redevelopment project in the country. It comprised about 1,800 total acres. And we wound up with the center core of the plant. And our mission was to turn it into from a completely empty and derelict industrial site into a fairly significant casino integrated resort project, much the same of the assignment that we have here in Everett. We wound up inheriting about 31 former buildings on the site. We took down 11 of them, and we kept the remaining buildings on the site to be used for adaptive reuse. But the main area where the casino was going to be located happened to be an old iron ore pit. So we had to take an old iron ore pit and turn it into a luxury casino resort. It was really quite a challenge. We spent a lot of time working on whether it was remediation projects and then doing some demolition work, making sure that we were, matter of fact, we worked very hard in terms of the recycling of materials on the project. It was about 240,000 tons of steel that came out. We wound up sending all the steel down to Nucor in Arkansas. It got melted down. We wound up buying our steel for the project right back from Nucor. And so in one regard, although I can't claim that we completely reused the steel, but it did go to the same plant it did get melted down, and then we actually turned out and bought about the same amount of steel that we had dropped off at the same plant. There was lots of use of excess materials on the site, stone and brick. And so wherever we could and found materials that we could reuse in the project, we tried to make that a real cornerstone of the project. And that work I did got me noticed by our chairman of the board, Steve Wynn. When they were up here in Massachusetts working with the team, they had a number of meetings with the Gaming Commission. They've talked to various folks, and there was a fairly significant expose that was written about our project, the Sands Casino Resort in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, by one of the Massachusetts newspapers. And that got picked up and sent all around the industry. And that led to a phone call to meet Mr. Wynn in New York. He said, I heard about the work you did in Bethlehem. We have a very similar project where we have this old Monsanto chemical plant that's quite dirty, needs significant remediation, and we like what you did in Pennsylvania. We'd like to see if you'd join the team, come up to Massachusetts, see if we can do one of these projects again, and join the pre-development team that was already on the site. It was a challenge that I really was up for. After going through that process in another location, I thought this is just a wonderful idea. You take these old industrial sites and turn them into a productive use again. We created about 3,000 jobs, and it spurred a lot of other redevelopment on the site. We took the blast furnaces and we lit them up with a fantastic LED light package, something that we had seen on a project over in Germany when they had some derelict plants that they needed to adaptively reuse. When I was leaving, we took the old elevated rail trestle and we're turning it into an elevated walkway, much the way they did with the High Line in New York City. So we tried to find little bits and pieces around the site where we could take what was there, repurpose it, clean it up, and turn it into a very neat and interesting tourist destination. So a project that I look fondly back, but I was ready to take on a new challenge and do one of these again. Behind me, you see a picture of our chairman, Steve Wynn. He truly is a visionary in the industry. If you know anything about the Wynn story, the family started with a bingo business in Maryland. Ultimately, Mr. Wynn wound up in Las Vegas and taking control of the Golden Nugget project downtown Las Vegas, and he revitalized that. And that led him to this idea of building the first brand new major integrated destination resort on the Las Vegas Strip, which was called the Mirage. And he opened the Mirage in 1999 to great fanfare. There were a lot of critics who thought it was a bridge too far. It was too much investment. You'd never get the return out. And he proved everybody wrong. The property turned out to be a smash success, and it led to further development of projects like Bellagio, Treasure Island, the Beau Rivage down on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And then ultimately, the public company wound up selling to MGM, and Mr. Wynn took the proceeds from that. He bought the old Desert Inn site and then created what is also, as you see on the photos behind me, the Wynn and Encore at Wynn project on the Las Vegas Strip. The most successful casino resort operation on the Las Vegas Strip. It's 5,100 rooms, incredible amount of meeting space, high-end restaurants, meeting and convention space is a specialty of ours. And it's a wonderful concept. We also were lucky to get one of the licenses in a place called Macau. I don't know if you know about Macau. Macau is a special administrative region of the People's Republic of China, fairly close to Hong Kong, and is now the world's #1 gaming market. And so we've opened up a Wynn and Wynn Encore in Macau. We're in the process of building the Palace in Macau, which is our next phase project, and of course working here in Everett. So it's a wonderful company with a great chairman who's a true visionary in the industry, and he's willing to put in $1.6 billion to rehabilitate, remediate, and open a wonderful integrated destination resort right close by here in Everett. And so I couldn't be happier to be part of the project. And with that kind of background, I want to turn it over to Chris. Chris Gordon has been working extensively on this project for quite a long time. and he's got some details about the development itself as well as the environmental remediation program. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Chris, and thank you.
The mic is in the earpiece. Does that work? All right. Thank you for having us. I appreciate it. Thank you, Bob. I'm going to walk you through a bunch of slides on the project itself, and I'm going to leave you with these slides. So don't worry if we go too fast because I got a bunch of stuff, but we're going to leave them with you. You can post them on your website. You can have them, whatever you want. So, and glad to be here. I'm an engineer by training. I'm a civil engineer and environmental engineer. I've cleaned up a lot of sites around the country. I can tell you about that sometime. My son is now studying environmental science somewhere else, so I'm completely understand what you're studying here and love it a lot. My role on the project is a development manager. I spend about a quarter of my time teaching, and I spend about 3/4 of my time consulting on big development projects around the world, and this is by far the biggest thing I'm working on right now, and I'm lucky enough to spend most of my time on this as we speak, and we're all hoping to get a license and move forward. Bob can tell you much more about gaming than I can. What I want to do is tell you about the site and why it's such a fascinating site. I'm going to show you some slides, but the site itself is the old Monsanto chemical plant. And it isn't quite on the Superfund list, but it should be. I mean, it's a pretty nasty site, and we're going to take it and transform it into a fantastic resort. And as a byproduct of that, we clean up the site, we clean up the water around it, we dredge the little inlet, we do a number of things, and we also actually do some fairly proactive environmental things as well. The other thing we're spending a lot of time on, you'll see in the slides, is the transportation network. This is what's called an urban Wynn. It's not in the middle of the desert, it's in the middle of the city. And when you do that, you've got to think about how people get there and how they get home. There's going to be restaurants, shopping, gaming, hotels, and we're very focused on how do people get there. That includes not just getting in their car and driving here and leaving again. It includes subways, it includes water shuttles, it includes walking, pedestrians, a lot of things, including connections here in Medford. So it's very unusual for a casino to spend this much effort on a transportation network, which we're going to show you as well. Let me briefly tell you about the site. About 3 years ago, 2011, the state of Massachusetts approved a gaming law. If you know anything about gaming, this takes a long time. It's controversial, but the state has done it, and we think done quite well. They created 3 regions, A, B, and C. We're competing in Region A, and no offense to our friends in B and C, but A is the real mothership. That's Boston. That's where most of the customers would be. That's where the big airport is. So everybody wanted a license in Region A. 11 companies started after this process. Most of them are long gone now. There are 2 left in Region A. It's us and Mohegan Sun. Mohegan Sun and Suffolk Downs. You've probably read all about that. We won't talk about that today. We're the site in Everett. So those are the only 2 left competing for a license in Region A. And we hope by the end of this summer to get a license. If we're lucky enough to do that, we're going to move fast after that. So that's a bit of the context. They also created the Mass Gaming Commission. And if you study government or you study public policy, it's a brand new agency that's regulating this whole process. And they got their hands full. They've done a very good job. They've got 5 commissioners. We think they're doing well, but they're getting everything thrown at them. So if you ever want to study how government sort of pops up overnight and creates a new agency, that's a great one to think about. Our site is right here in Everett. You're sitting further up in Medford, downtown Boston, Logan Airport, Suffolk Downs, Charlestown. We love the site. The first time when Steve Wynn hired me, I went out there and I had the president, Matt Maddox, on the phone. I said, Matt, are you sure about this site? It's like between a power plant and a dump. But the more you get to know the site, you realize it is an absolute gem, and I wouldn't trade it. We've been asked many times to look at other sites, and we wouldn't trade it. It's a great site. First of all, it's very near downtown Boston. We're 5 to 10 minutes away from Boston in a cab, in a boat. We're on walking trails. We're on biking trails. We're on the Mystic River, so we have a waterfront piece of property. We're in Everett, who has embraced us like no community I've ever seen. I mean, when I do this stuff around the world, I'm usually sort of in the bunker because there's always a NIMBY issue about, you can build anything you want, but don't build it anywhere near me. Everett has been great. They're very anxious for economic development. They have one of the highest unemployment rates in Massachusetts. They've got a great mayor, and they want us. They voted almost 90%, thanks to John and his folks. We're able to get a huge vote in Everett, and that's very unusual. When you zoom, there's another, well, there was another location slide, it's not there, but so point being, access is just great. If you look at the Wynn Everett property that we're proposing, there's a tower. It's about a 20-story tower which will house 500 luxury hotel rooms. It'll be a 500-key 5-star hotel. So it'll be one of, if not the nicest hotel in New England. It'll certainly be the nicest hotel in Boston. It'll attract customers from all over the place, and it'll be very much of a high-end clientele for the hotel. I'll show you a site plan in a minute, but there's a retail wing that goes out toward the river. There's a podium where the gaming and the hotel area is. Then there's back a house behind that. The gaming is a little less than 10% of the resort. So when you hear casino, whether you love casinos or hate casinos, keep in mind it's about 10% of the project. It is the cash cow on the property, don't get me wrong. It allows all the rest of this to happen, but it is about 10% of the project. Steve Wynn, when he's made presentations in Boston, has said he views himself as a hotel developer. Casinos are nice, I love casinos, is his words, but he said, I'm really a luxury hotel developer and casinos allow me to do that. So when you think about this property, we think we're building a luxury resort, luxury hotel that also has a casino. Oh, there's my other location site, I'm sorry. If you go a little closer, we've got the site here, we've got 3 MBTA stops very nearby, Wellington, Assembly Square, Sullivan Square. You've got the Gateway project right next door. You've got a heavy industrial zone here, which has everything from fuel tanks to scrap yards to everything else. And then you got Charlestown right across. This is as you drive into the site. If you know Broadway at all in Everett, there's a mobile station there right now. Right on it's a pretty large convenience a mobile station. This is almost exactly where the mobile station is. So you would drive in, you'd have this great view of the tower, you'd see the podium here, the retailer on the front, and then you would look out at the river. You can start to see the river as you come further into the driveway, drop-off areas here. A huge effort on interior and exterior landscaping. And not just unsustainable, inefficient, very sustainable landscaping, we think. We're working with local landscape architects who've done a lot of work along the Mystic River, including Pam Shadley, who did a lot of the award-winning work up and down the Mystic. And the intent is to make it very much of an elegant landscape, but also a landscaping that's understands the New England climate and can be maintained without using too many resources to do it. This is a site plan, as I mentioned. You're going to drive in off Broadway. This is the hotel tower here. The views back toward Boston are spectacular. This is an inlet that's there today, and I've got some slides of it later, that is frankly full of abandoned stuff. There are barges, there are barrels. We met with the MBTA who runs the T station. They said, oh yeah, you know this little corner over here, this little vacant land here, that's where we used to burn our buses. And I said, what do you mean burn our buses? And they said, yeah, when buses would reach their useful life, we'd drive them out here on the peninsula and we'd burn them. So that's that's how this land was treated. When other people have looked at it, this is a sludge treatment plant from the Boston Water and Sewer. This is a sewer pumping station from MWRA, and across the street is the big power plant where you all get your power from. So this was viewed as the backlands. Put anything you can over there. Nobody will look. It's Everett. Who cares? Let's just put the junk over there. Everett has now realized they've got a gem, and they want to revitalize it. So this would be the beginning of that. But the inlet, unfortunately, is still full of abandoned boats, abandoned barges. This allows us to clean all that out. We're going to drag the stuff out of there. We're going to dredge the harbor. We're going to make it a very viable inlet for bringing in water shuttles, private craft, public craft, that sort of stuff. So it really transforms that part. And I'll show you in a minute, but we're also going to clean up all around the river's edge and out into the harbor. This is the program. I won't go through it in detail, but as I mentioned, it's about 2.6 million square feet. That's big. If you haven't seen a building that big, that's a big building. 500 keys in the hotel, a number of retail locations. The casino has about 4,000 gaming positions. That's a large casino. So this is a large resort. And to fit this on about 33 acres, that sounds like a lot of land, but it's not. It's a very efficient, very good site plan that fits that all onto the property. To give you an example, I was scared the other night. I was reading a biography of Eisenhower that somebody gave me for the holidays, and he was talking about when he became president of Columbia. I didn't know he was president of Columbia. When he became president of Columbia, the entire campus was 22 acres. The entire campus in Columbia. This is 33 acres, and we think it's tight, so interesting comparison. A little bit of history. This site was the landing of a historic toll bridge. The way you used to get from this whole part of the state over to Boston was to go over a toll bridge, which was immediately adjacent to our site. The reason that's important is, in those days, in order to collect a toll, you had to own both ends of the toll bridge. So there's a little finger of land that goes way up into Everett to capture the other toll booth back from the 1700s. That little finger of land is still there, and that's why in the paper every day you read about Boston claiming host status. If that little toll booth wasn't there in the 1700s, this would be a moot point. But because it touches the edge of our property, we're still on a daily basis fighting over whether or not this is in Everett or in Boston. I assure you we're in Everett. Everything we're doing is in Everett. We're completely in Everett, but that's where the debate comes from, is this little tiny spot of land. More recently, this is around 1920, heavy industrial use. This was the sort of back of house for all of New England. All the power plants, all the scrap yards, all the steel mills, everything were in Everett. Everything was in the waterfront. This is a shot where they're actually pumping dredge out of the harbor and filling in the inlet, and this inlet soon became the big power plant. This is the new toll bridge, and this little building is still there. If you went out to Everett today, you'd see it. It's full of graffiti, but it's a beautiful little building there. This is our site. This is a crane where they unloaded chemicals. Those trusses are still in the water. I could show them to you today. These are old Monsanto buildings. They used to make everything here from cyanide to you name it. Every chemical you never want to touch was made on the site. They would batch it. What's that? Oh, it's not touch. John actually has a scrapbook of old clippings from the site, and it talks about things like gas releases where everybody in town got sick. It talks about a community picnic where people fled down Broadway running with their picnic baskets because there was another release. So the site has a very strong negative environmental history. I've cleaned up worse, but not much worse. I did a Superfund site where I chaired a realty trust that bought a Superfund site, the one that's in Civil Action, the Travolta movie. And I would argue this is pretty darn close to being that bad. And that was a very nasty site. This is the site today. It's stunning in two ways. In a positive way, it's 33 vacant acres in the middle of the city. You can't find 33 acres anywhere in the city, so that's the good news. The bad news is if you look, there's not a building, there's barely a blade of grass, there's no vegetation at all. We've done a very detailed ecological study, and the term that they brought back was it was ecologically a desert. Nothing was living, nothing was breathing, nothing was happening. So it's a very dormant, contaminated site. Most of the contamination is heavy metals. To add insult to injury, it had all the Monsanto junk, and then when they built the Deer Island treatment plant and they dug out the tunnel and they dug part of the other side of the big dig, they took a bunch of that fill and dumped it on top of it. So we had the old contaminated soil, and now we got some new contaminated soil all on one site. The good news is we know how to clean it up. This isn't new technology. We know how to do it, but it's a pretty rough site. These are some shots from today. Those are the abandoned barges out in the water. You can see there's a lot of, frankly, junk on the site. This is the underpass where we're going to build a walkway, and these are the old trusses in the water where you saw the rail cranes unloading the work. This is all there today. It's been abandoned for about 35 years. It's been sold, but everybody backs out, then sold again. Everybody backs out, and then sold again. It changed hands about 8 years ago under a very distressed sale, and before that, it just sat idle because nobody wanted to take on the liability. The context is all industrial with the exception of our friends over at Gateway. A few years ago, they bought the other half of the Monsanto site and did a big box retail development, and good for them. They've been very successful. They're doubling their projections. This is a DDRC development, and their numbers are off the charts in customers. And when they bought this, their shareholders said, you may be putting the company out of business. So that's an example of a brownfield development that really made it happen. Other than that, I got to tell you, we're totally industrial. There's no way to get to the waterfront if you live in Everett. There's the biggest scrapyard in New England, the biggest power plant in New England. It's just a rough scene. So between Gateway and us, you're going to start to see development, I think, wrap around the corner. This site has been studied to death. Everybody's done studies. The city of Everett, DDRC, everybody studied it. And the conclusion was always to redevelop this, but nobody was able to pull the trigger. There's been master plans. There's been district development plans by the city, and they've just not been able to get it moving. We did a municipal harbor plan with the city of Everett. This is a step in the environmental process to get permission to redevelop this. We now have our completed municipal harbor plan, which talks about development on the river, talks about river access, talks about boat launches, and so we're very happy to be through that process. We're now working on Chapter 91, which is the next step in developing along a riverfront. Luckily in Massachusetts, this is my green hat, the rivers are very well protected, which is good news. The downside is when you want to redevelop a site like this, you not only have to do the regular redevelopment approvals, you also have to go through all the river protection approvals. And again, we believe in that stuff, but man, there's a lot to it. So we're working our way through Chapter 91 now. We're doing very well, and we expect to get approvals on that as well. This talks about the municipal harbor plan. The other thing we like a lot is the public realm. Our site is over here. There's about 7 miles north of us along the Mystic River and further up of paths, walking paths, trails, and parks. And then there's a lot of stuff over in Charlestown, and you can't get between the two. So we'll be the last tooth in that connection, if you will. Once we develop our public walkways across our site, you'll be able to go from the ocean in Boston and all the way around there, through the city, through Charlestown, across our site, all the way up the Mystic River, and eventually you can go for miles and miles with rails and trails and other stuff. So it's going to be a huge connection, and we're already working with DCR to connect into this park, go through our site, around our site, and back out to Broadway, and maybe eventually out around the peninsula along here. Open to the public, 24/7, well lit, secured. So in other words, we'll have security people out there, so there's a safe place to go. So if you want to ride your bike, walk your dog, we've committed this will be open to you anytime you want to go out along there. So you can bike or walk or run all the way along the Mystic for miles and miles and miles, including our site. Here's an example of some of the walkways that are out there now. This one we can do a lot better than that, and this is the connection where it's actually going to go through. We can definitely do a lot better than that. Fishing piers, canoe launches. We'll be working on this with the city of Everett. Environmental remediation. There's 3 steps to the environmental remediation. We have arsenic, we have lead, we have copper, and we have some cyanide on the site, plus a bunch of smaller issues. 3 steps is, first step is we remove the hot spots. So we're going to go in 3 specific areas. We're just going to dig it up and put it somewhere else in a certified landfill because it's too contaminated for us to deal with. Step number 2 is we're going to solidify some of the soil. It's called in situ solidification. We're actually going to pump in like a lightweight concrete slurry, and we're going to solidify areas. The reason is the site has both heavy metals and it has a very low pH. Low pH means it's very acidic. So the acidic soil deteriorates the heavy metals and they wash into the river. So as we sit here today, and for the last 35 years, this stuff's been sloshing back and forth into the river. And everybody's been talking about it. Everybody's been, writing about it. Nobody's been doing anything about it. So what we're going to do is go in and solidify those areas so that the heavy metals can stay right where they are and will be neutralized forever and not be able to go back and forth in the river. So that's a big step. Third step is during construction, we have to handle certain soils with the special conditions. For example, during our deep excavation, if soils reach a certain threshold, they go to one landfill, another threshold, they go to another landfill. Pretty routine stuff. We're going to spend about $30 million cleaning up the site. If you're interested in learning how remediation works, it's a great site to watch because we have a little bit of everything for everybody. But when we're done, it will be clean. You can go out and sit on the lawn. You can walk your dog. You can, the only use limitations will be deep in the ground, which you'll never get to. So as the public goes and as customers go, it's like walking around your campus here, which we're pretty excited about. The dredging we talked about, but there's going to be a big dredge in the harbor, which will be important for the water shuttle system. The living shoreline. One of the things that we want to do is create a living shoreline around the edge of the property. We originally looked at a bulkhead wall, and we were very quickly reminded by a lot of very good environmental activists, it's much better to have a living shoreline where groundwater and surface water can run into the river, where the tides can come back and forth, and you can get some level of treatment along the edge of the resort. So we're now going to be building a living shoreline, which will have a couple of components. First of all, it'll have a vegetated shoreline around the outside, not a hard edge, and we're going to be replanting shellfish in the river, so those shellfish can help us actually clean the river. A typical oyster cleans about 50 gallons of water a day. So if you put 100,000 oysters in there, which is the kind of numbers we're talking about, you can absolutely clean up that part of the river. It's being done in New York. It's being done elsewhere on the South Shore. It's being done in Cape Cod. And so we're working now with a group called the Oyster Project in Massachusetts, which is working with us to help us put oysters back into the river where they used to be. This particular site was the home of the Union Oyster House, the oldest restaurant in America, where they used to get the oysters off this site. So it's gone from being the home of the best oysters in the country to being a dead zone where nothing grows. We want to go back toward using oysters to clean up the site. So just to show you that cross-section again, vegetation here, oysters here, resort up here, with a tidal swing that'll help clean the area there. Stormwater, again, we've got a very robust stormwater program. We're on the river, so we have to treat all our stormwater. We'll certainly be doing that. Water transportation, we're looking at a low-profile catamaran that can go from downtown Boston right to the site and back. Every 15 minutes, you'll be able to get a ride. With a catamaran, there's 2 advantages. We go below the drawbridges, so we're not opening and closing during rush hour. And number 2 is they can go fast. We can get you to the convention center. We can get you to the garden. We can get you to downtown Boston in 15 minutes. So we think this is going to be a huge draw to get people out of their cars and off the roads. These are much more environmentally friendly than the cars are, and they're kind of cool. I mean, the intent is to kind of overdo these from a marketing point of view and a slick point of view, and I'll defer to Bob on how to market the heck out of these, but the idea will be it's going to be cool to take the boat. Now, by the way, it's also great environmentally, but it's really going to be a cool thing to do. So if you're at a downtown hotel, you jump on the boat and they whiz you to the casino, kind of cool. Sustainable, I could go on for hours, but it's going to be a very green building. We'll be at least LEED Gold. We'd like to get the LEED higher, and we'll try to get to LEED Platinum if we can. Casinos have a tough time being that, but we're not backing down. We're going to do it. So you're going to see a very high level of sustainable design. And again, at some point we should come back and tell you about it, but everything from the energy use to the recycled materials to our recycling program would be extremely aggressive. I've done a lot of green buildings. I did the first ISO 14000 certified airport in the country, the first LEED certified airport terminal in the country. I mean, I was the first one on a lot of those, and this will be better. I mean, I think we can really hit some home runs with what we're going to do in this building. Storm level rise, like it or not, the ocean is rising. Look at what we've seen in other places. We are well above the ocean level, and we're also designing the building to withstand even future sea level rise. So we don't, you know, we're completely aware of the rising ocean. Everybody's bummed about it, but we're going to design for it. So we're not going to be surprised if the ocean is a little higher in the next 100 years. Adaptability, again, we're very focused on that. Environmental benefits, we've hit most of these, but again, I'll leave these slides with you. Transportation, I won't go through all this, but as I said earlier, we're very proud of the extensive transportation mitigation. We're working with Medford on Wellington Circle, we're working with Boston on Sullivan Square, we're working with Everett on Broadway, we're working with Chelsea on the Vero Beach Parkway. When we're done, and we'll be paying for this, it's going to be a dramatic improvement in the transportation network for vehicles, for buses, for boats, for walkers. And so I know every day in the paper there's an article about how our traffic is going to squash everything. We really would argue that. And I don't mean to be that, but we think we're going to be in much better shape when we're done than we are today, and certainly much better than it would be if we did nothing. So we can go on and on about that at the right time. We also produce a lot of money. I know this isn't a business class, but we'll produce about $200 million a year that we're going to give to the Commonwealth as part of our gaming tax. It'll go up. It actually rises quite quickly. So we'll start at about $200 million. That's new money. If you know the state's brackets, it's targeted for things like culture, education, transportation. We have no control over that money, but that's newfound money that will go into the area. So a lot of the groups that have wanted funding for years are going to get it, and we're very proud of that. We're not, you know, this is a big number. That's year one, and it goes up very, very quickly. So you can see the amount of money that will go into the Commonwealth. Last slide, I'll just boil it down for you. We want to get a license in August. We want to start construction by the end of 14, and we want Bob to be wildly opening the doors right around the end of 17, early 18. That is optimistic, that's aggressive, and that's exactly how we want to do it. That's not a pokey schedule. That means going like heck between now and the beginning of 2018. That's Steve Wynn style. That's what we're doing. So that's what the approach. A lot of slides. I'll leave them with you, but now we ought to stop so you can have some time for questions. Can we just set this here?
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Will that work? Okay.
So I think you give us all the questions. What's the stuff?
Sir.
So there was a brief mention of stormwater management techniques and what was best management practices involved or something like that. But I just needed to hear more about landscape.
Sure.
Resort. How, what sort of steps stormwater?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely, and I'm going to repeat it briefly because they're putting this on the WebEx thing. The question was about a little more detail on the stormwater system because we are on the river and we want to make sure we have a robust stormwater system. It's a complicated system, but right now there's two outlets that are already on the site from other properties. Those are going to be rebuilt and cleaned up a bit so they do a better job of filtering the stormwater. We're also going to have our own underground store water retention system so that the stormwater from the site that can't be reused on the site will be treated primarily in underground treatment systems. These will be retention tanks, frac tanks, that kind of stuff. And eventually a lot of it will get released into the river once it's treated. We're also going to be using a lot of gray water in both our irrigation and some of our plumbing systems, so you'll see a lot of reuse of water. About 50% of the site is open space. So the building takes about 50% and then about 50% is open. Now that's not all pervious. Some of that is asphalt. So I would guess, and I'm going to make this up, but I'm probably in the 35, 40% range of green grass. So we hope we'll have infiltration there. So the big issue on the stormwater is it'll be pre-treated on-site, underground, before it goes into the river. So that's an example. As much as we love the river location, that's a big expense. So we're going to be having to have these systems. It's almost like a septic system, but it's going to be really done for stormwater.
I'll sort of bifurcate that a little bit. When referring back to the site in Bethlehem, when we had bought the site, there was a tremendous amount of environmental remediation that was done by Bethlehem Steel prior to us taking ownership of the site. They were extremely concerned after steel and iron making for 100 years on the site. What their kind of worst nightmare was that the site would be kind of left. They put a big fence around it and never to be used again. So Bethlehem Steel knew that before they actually even sold the site, they were going to have to pony up quite a bit of money to make sure that there was even a chance that it might be able to be picked up. So in our case, a lot of that heavy lifting was done by Bethlehem Steel as an agreement with the city of Bethlehem so they could obviously repurpose the site. In our case, we're taking it as is, and it's our responsibility to clean it up. So the money will be on the back of Wynn Resorts to go ahead and do that environmental cleanup. No, it's because we're taking it as is. So, yeah, it's not currently a Superfund site.
Let me elaborate briefly on that. I think it's a fascinating issue, who pays for the cleanup. Bob's exactly right. On our site, we're taking it as is, and because of that, we're paying a lot less than you would if it wasn't contaminated. So the money moves that way. There's also an old judgment against Monsanto on the site that's about $7.5 million that the sellers are going to collect. So if you think about the math and the formula, the sellers are going to get money from Wynn, and they're going to get money from Monsanto, and that should make them relatively whole. On the other Monsanto site I did, and if you've seen the civil action book, there was a civil action site, and then there was our site right next door. Both were about, one was 4 and one was 5 on the Superfund list. In that case, because it was a Superfund site, we paid $1 for the property, and Monsanto paid $75 million to clean it up. And they didn't put 1 ounce of contamination on it. It's an amazing story, but which I won't go into another time. But Monsanto bought a property in Lynn, I believe, like in 1922. And as part of the Lynn property, they got a property in Woburn, which was just part of the deal. They threw it in like an extra chicken in the litter. And they sold it a year later, 1923, and never did anything to the site. In about 1995, 98, the EPA got very aggressive on Superfund site cleanup. Monsanto was tagged to this site. There were 15 potential responsible parties in the history of the site. Monsanto was the only one that still existed. Everybody else had gone out of business. So we were able to get them to put up $75 million to clean up the site. They would argue, and I negotiated for 3 years, and it was the meanest, nastiest negotiation I've ever been in. Monsanto would argue that's just fundamentally unfair. And as Tommy Lee Jones would say, we don't care. That's the law. And we won. So in that case, depending on who was in the room talking to you, you get 2 very different versions of remediation costs. But on this site, we're in very good shape.
I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about when you have a brownfield project. To me, it seems like it's pretty tough to put a bill to do something. What kinds of industries are capable of doing this kind of remediation?
Well,
so the hoteling, casino, that's just new to Massachusetts. So in the scheme of paying this kind of bill, who can pull this off? Because it seems to be a huge challenge.
Well, you got to look at the economics of it. This site, I'm surprised it's been vacant for 35 years, because if you do something much less intrusive like a big box retail, for example, Walmart looked at this site for many years, and they were going to just pave the whole thing and put a big box on it, and they could do less remediation under that scenario, because they would have put an AUL and activity and use limitation of the whole site, and it would have been fine. We do not want an AUL. We want to make sure you can go out and walk around the grass. We didn't want to limit where people could go. So if you want a complete permanent solution for a site like this, you got to have a revenue stream, which either means a profitable business like a resort, or you get a government grant of some sort, or you get a potentially responsible party. So, I mean, I'm just surprised it sat there that long. But the trick is, if you're the city of Medford, yeah, you could get somebody to develop it as long as you don't make them clean it up to the level that you might otherwise have to. I'm not sure that's a good answer. I mean, okay, you get a big box there and you pave over it, but there's still a lot of stuff in the ground. So to answer your question on a site like this, if a casino resort wasn't here, you would get development, but you wouldn't get anywhere near the cleanup that we're going to be able to do. Which, by the way, and I know this is, to get into the politics of it, we've got a lot of supporters that are neutral on casinos. They don't really care, but they love the fact the site's finally getting back into action and it's finally getting cleaned up. So we've won over a lot of people, and I'm just being honest with you. We've been able to win over a lot of people who said, you know what, I may or may not ever go to a casino, but go for it. This is good. And that helps. I mean, it's good economic development. Yeah, the question was how much is the contaminated material going to ship off, and I've got to plead ignorance. I know that the numbers are in my computer, but they're not in my head. The harbor, it's not a lot. The hotspots are relatively small. I mean, they're literally, you know, like 30 feet across, maybe 15 feet deep. So they're small areas, but they're quite contaminated. The area that will have the biggest impact is less contaminated. It's the garage excavation. We have 500,000 cubic yards to take out of the garage. Most of that is not very contaminated. Some of it is. We're trying to find a reuse for that. And we're talking to quarries and golf courses and other developments to see if we can sell that dirt to somebody else. If not, it'll go to a landfill, but we don't want to do that. So to answer, and I apologize, I don't have the exact numbers. The quantities are small, the contamination is high, so it's very expensive. I love the story of Bob's of reusing steel pellets. I never heard of that. That's fascinating. Do that.
First of all, thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to, and I know that, you know, we're not proving anything for you guys to share with us, especially coming into a university environment. Somewhat, you know, there's a distance between the business world and how we think the university side of our business shit that up. What I want to ask you guys about is, you know, in my experience with a lot of hotels, employees, you know, the promises made up front, what this will do for the public, how this will be better for folks. A lot of times have eroded over time, beach access, things like that. And I hear you guys talking about the same things, you know, access along the waterfront. You know, I think those are wonderful things. What is in place to ensure that, you know, the public and the community is still always part of this this enterprise here that, you know, not only physical but cultural benefits and a sense of belonging to the place that takes to go out. Give an example, like along the waterfront, is that going to be an easement dedicated to access, or is are you conditioning that on your permits? Or I could imagine the fact that, contrary to where I come from, Everett is just so happy to have somebody coming there, you know, take away this liability that, you know, there's kind of go carte blanche. So
that's a wonderful question. Let me repeat, just for the benefit of everyone who's listening. The question was, you take a casino resort project like this, and how does the general public get any sort of assurances that you will live up to the promises that you make, that you will stay engaged with your surrounding communities, and the fact that we are doing a good thing and the community is so happy to get somebody to develop the site. Do you worry that they would loosen their standards and basically give us carte blanche to do whatever we want? So first of all, I want to say it's a very thoughtful, it's a great question. And let me take it from a number of different avenues. First and foremost, you know, Wynn Resorts, we pride ourselves on doing nothing other than 5-star first-class properties. If the company makes a commitment to do something, we have to live up to it. We are a publicly traded company. It would be embarrassing for the company if we proposed a project and it had a number of components, and then it turns out that you build something other than that. So the company is completely committed to make sure that we do that. There's also, there is, however, a regulatory backstop for that. The Massachusetts Gaming Commission has started a extremely thoughtful and in-depth process of how to make sure that operators that want to come to the jurisdiction fulfill their obligations. In our application process, we had to thoroughly describe what it is we were going to do, and they will hold us accountable to make sure we do that because we are licensed, and that license is held by the Commonwealth through the Gaming Commission. We're also making commitments to our community partners. I've been with the company only a short while, and I've spent the better part of my time here in municipal office buildings, in city halls, and the State House, going around, because one of the obligations that we have is to make sure that we negotiate and put on paper surrounding community agreements. And we're currently working with, in Lynn and Melrose, we have neighboring community agreements. We've already signed agreements in Medford and Malden. This afternoon, we're going over to see the city of Cambridge to work on their agreement. We already have a host agreement with the city of Everett, and that leaves Chelsea and Boston that we're still working on. And so those agreements are not going to be on a handshake. They're going to be memorialized in a document, and they have many years to them. So whether it's through our own company and making sure that we do the right thing for our shareholders and our team members and all of our stakeholders, or through the Massachusetts Gaming Commission, which you can be rest assured will hold our feet to the fire to make sure that we deliver everything we promise, to a series of written agreements with our surrounding community partners to make sure that if we talk about a walkway that goes around the property, that walkway is there, and it's not just for the benefit of the guests of the resorts, it's actually a benefit for all the residents in the area. So wonderful question. But our feet will be held to the fire by any number of stakeholders in the process. Yes, sir. Great. So the question was, are the community agreements, first of all, done via a vote or some sort of input from the community? And then how are they ultimately executed? That's a great question as well. A number of different answers. First of all, the enabling legislation required us to have a vote within our host community to make sure that we are wanted. It's not, when you're going to develop a $1.6 billion project, the last thing you want to do is put it in a community that is not interested in having you. So by overwhelming majority, it was 87% vote. The city of Everett blessed the fact that there would be a integrated destination casino resort in their community. But it goes much deeper than that. Then we had to sit down with all the municipal departments and actually negotiate a host agreement. It was an extensive process, and it's everything from a pilot program, a payment in lieu of taxes, to mitigation fund, to a number of different agreements, and that was just with the city of Everett. Now, the surrounding communities, there's no vote mechanism. So once there's a vote in your host community, you have to then negotiate the surrounding community agreements. Significant amount of input. Since I've been here, we've been back and forth to all of these cities, and it's not just the city, either the mayor or city manager. We walk into rooms with 10 and 12 people, and they've assigned everything from housing to green space to environmental to transportation to public safety, you name it. And they've got little committees and groups and consultants that they're using, and then we negotiate. So they'll come up and say, we believe that public safety is going to be an issue because we may have to put more police officers on the street because there's traffic coming through our community. So they'll negotiate a dollar amount, which we might then tie to the community agreement that we could help in support of that. And so there's a very in-depth, thoughtful process that's used to make sure that we go around to these surrounding communities and we come up with agreements that are lock solid. We then have to take those agreements and register them with the Gaming Commission so they can, again, keep track of what we're doing. So it's a very significant process that we have to go through. Yes? Well, first of all, just to get to LEED Gold is a huge step forward. I don't know if you're that familiar with the legislation, but in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the starting point was that there would be no smoking in the building whatsoever. Now, that is unusual because in most casino projects, let's use the Las Vegas Strip, for example. Smoking is allowed either on the casino floor or a portion of the casino floor, and then typically not in the rest of the building. Well, once you have smoke in the building, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, then official LEED Gold certification is not in the cards. You can be, and in the case of Las Vegas, we have all of the qualities for LEED Gold, but the one thing we do have is there's still areas in the building where there's smoking allowed. In this particular location, there will be no smoking in the building, so that gives us the opportunity to make a leap ahead. How you get from gold to platinum, you might want to take.
We actually have a shot at LEED Platinum, and I've done LEED Platinum buildings, and this one has a shot at it. But to answer your question, first of all, the casino is 24/7. It's lit, it's cooled, it's heated. It's also the casino itself is normally doesn't have a lot of exterior ventilation, exterior windows. You've got a 5-star hotel, which has a lot of inefficiencies in it. Having said that, we think by designing this building as well as we're trying to do, we think we can get there. We're definitely going to be the LEED Gold, and we have to get the LEED Gold, by the way. That's a requirement. But the no smoking helps us. Also, the energy efficiency, we're going to have our own on-site plant, which will be cogeneration. We're going to have extensive use of solar. We're going to have, hopefully, geothermal. We're going to have a lot of gray water reuse. We're going to have a very aggressive recycling program. We're going to have biodigestion of food waste. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff. The outside landscaping, we think, is an opportunity. We also get some points, as you know, because of the site itself. So we're going to go after it. We haven't publicly said LEED Platinum, because if you say LEED Platinum, you get gold, you're a failure. Or if you say gold, you get gold, you're a success. So frankly, we're careful, but we think there's a shot at getting platinum.
One more question, I would say. What are the jobs that you have?
Great question. It was about the job creation ability of the project, and then how do we kind of focus that job creation on the local effort. In our host community and surrounding community agreements, we cover jobs extensively. Obviously, the city of Everett stepped up to the plate, and they signed on as our host community, so we want to make sure that we give them preferential treatment. We're talking about 4,000 jobs, so we would become one of the largest employers in the region, and that's all levels, from hospitality service workers right up through the executive ranks, so it'll be significant. Plus, jobs in our industry in the hospitality side of the business come with not only a salary, but also great opportunity for tips. If you know anything about how it works in the casinos, the dealers, of course, the folks in the restaurants, they all get a significant amount of their income from the tips. But we want to make sure that we provide those opportunities for those surrounding communities, and we're spelling that out in the agreements. Typically, in a project like this, you're going to find that probably 90% of the people are going to wind up coming from, I'm going to say, a 10-mile, 15-mile radius. It's very close in. We also want to try to link up, as Chris mentioned earlier, the transportation infrastructure. We'd love to get a lot of them to use mass transit. So we're talking about setting up shuttle systems to T-stops and see if we can get folks to go to different locations. The employees will not park on site. We're going to have remote parking and then shuttle them in, or we'll shuttle them in from some sort of a mass transit option. But we want to keep it local. We want to make sure that we respect the communities that we're going to be their neighbors with and give them first preference for the jobs. And so really on behalf of John and Chris and myself, again, we want to thank you. It's really been a pleasure being here at Tufts. We look forward to visiting in the future, and hope you were able to get something beneficial out of Lunch and Learn.
Well, thank you very much.
John does all the hard work.
Yes.
You did.